You start your shift at a hotel in a major city in the Midwest. You go to check on a guest who's left their phone off the hook. But instead of discovering a drunk patron or, worse yet, a suicide, you discover something much more terrifying, much more mysterious, and it's a mystery never to be solved.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
The mystery of room 1046 really got to me. I'd never heard of it at all. It's a creepy one, especially if you've stayed in many hotels, because sometimes when you crash at your accommodations, you notice that your neighbors are a bit strange. Perhaps they keep odd hours, or have very loud conversations, or just listen to the TV too damn loud. But in my wildest dreams, I would never imagine something like what you're going to hear about tonight could have happened on the other side of a thin hotel wall. But that's what we're diving into tonight, so get ready to learn all about the mystery of Roland T. Owen, or was he? Right after these quick words from our sponsors. "87 years ago, in 1935, Kansas City, Missouri became the home of one of the strangest unsolved cases in American history, after a young man displayed peculiar behavior after checking into the President Hotel. He was found slumped over in a pool of his own blood. His body showed signs of torture, as he was bound with cords and stabbed numerous times. The man was still semi-conscious, though, so the detectives asked who did this to him. He replied, "Nobody," before falling unconscious and later dying in the hospital. After 2 years of the case running cold, the investigators believed they'd found what they were searching for. However, this discovery only left everyone more puzzled and with many, many more questions. On Wednesday, January 2nd, 1935, a lone man walked into the President Hotel at 14th and Baltimore Street in Kansas City, Missouri. He didn't have any luggage with him, but he dressed neatly in his black overcoat and appeared polished. The hotel staff recalled that he was well-mannered and signed the register as Roland T. Owen. Roland requested a single room on one of the upper floors, specifically an interior room without access to the outdoors. Witnesses later described him as being someone who could easily look like he was in his early 20s, or he could very well pass for his late 30s. Roland had dark brown hair and a noticeable scar on the side of his scalp, rising horizontally above his ear. He also had a cauliflower left ear, which is a deformity of the outer ear that's caused by blunt force trauma. This kind of injury is from repeated blows to the ear and is typically found on professional boxers and amateur wrestlers. The hotel clerk gave Roland a key to room 1046 on the 10th floor and sent the bellboy on duty, Randolph Probst, to escort him. While the two chatted on the elevator ride, Roland told the bellboy that he stayed at the neighboring Muhlebach Hotel the night before, where they had charged him an outrageous amount for his accommodations. When they entered the room, Roland walked through the short entryway, and Randolph watched as he took out a black hairbrush from his coat pocket, as well as a black comb and toothpaste. He then placed them above the bathroom sink. These were the only items he had on him. The housekeeper for the day, Mary Soptic, was making her rounds at noon when she knocked on room 1046. Most of the hotel guests weren't there during midday, so she was surprised when Roland opened the door. She said she could come back later, but Roland insisted she just go ahead. Once she was in the room, Roland asked her to not lock the door, as he was expecting a friend in a few minutes. Mary noticed that all the shades were completely closed, and the only source of light in the room was the dim lamp on the desk. Mary told the police that his face showed anxiety and uneasiness. While Mary was cleaning, Roland put on his coat, brushed his hair in the bathroom, and then left. He reminded her to still leave the door unlocked for the friend he was expecting. Mary would return to the room several times over the next few days, and each time she did, Roland's behavior grew stranger. Mary finished, and as she continued working throughout the hotel, she didn't see Roland. But at 4 p.m., she stopped by room 1046 to give him fresh towels. The door was unlocked just as she left it, but the room was now completely dark. She could see from the light in the hallway, though, that Roland was lying across the bed, completely dressed. She also noticed a note on the desk that read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The following morning on January 3rd, Mary went to room 1046 at around 10:30 a.m. to clean. She assumed Roland was checked out, so she used her master key to unlock the door that was now locked. When she entered, she found Roland sitting in the dark. This is when she realized that someone else had locked his door from the outside. Before she would say anything to him, the phone rang. Roland answered and responded to the caller. "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast." And then, after a moment, he replied again, "No, I am not hungry." After he hung up the phone, Roland began interrogating Mary with questions about her. Did she work by herself on the entire floor? Was the President a resident hotel where guests can live? Then he began complaining about the Muhlebach Hotel's prices, as he did with the bellboy. Mary answered his questions and made small talk as she finished cleaning and gathering the soiled linens. Around 4 p.m., she went back up to room 1046 to deliver a fresh set of towels. But when she approached, she overheard two men talking. When she gently knocked on the door and announced that she had fresh towels, a loud and deep voice told her to leave, claiming they didn't need them. Mary found this odd because she knew they didn't have any towels, but she left the two men alone, not wanting to intrude on what sounded like a very private conversation. That same afternoon, the President Hotel checked in 2 more guests, whose statements would later contribute to the mystery of what happened in room 1046. Around 6 p.m., 30-year-old Jean Owen, who had no relation to Roland, arrived at the hotel and registered shortly thereafter. She had come from Lee's Summit to do some shopping and meet up with her boyfriend, but she began feeling ill and decided to check into the hotel rather than driving the 30 minutes back home. Her room number was 1048 and shared a wall with room 1046. Her boyfriend visited her around 8 p.m. and then left around 10. Later, Jean told police that during the night of her stay, she heard a lot of noise. She said she heard men and women talking loudly and swearing. She almost called the front desk but decided against it. The noise continued throughout the night. The other guest was a regular at the President Hotel. One of the bellhops described her as a commercial woman who frequented the hotel with male patrons. Charles Blocker, the elevator operator on the graveyard shift, escorted the woman to the 10th floor around 2 a.m. She made inquiries about room 1026, but couldn't find the man she was looking for, despite her reporting that he was very prompt in his appointments. After searching for hours and calling Charles up and back down the elevator, she finally gave up and left the hotel. Could she have been looking for Roland in room 1046 on the 10th floor? The following morning, Randolph, the same bellhop who escorted Roland the first day, was called by the telephone operator. The operator reported that the telephone in room 1046 had been off the hook for 10 minutes. When Randolph went to check it out, he noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the doorknob. He knocked on the door, and Roland told him to come in. But the door was locked, and Randolph didn't have a master key. He told Roland this and yelled for him to put the phone back on the hook, but he got no response. Assuming he was simply just drunk, Randolph left. However, an hour and a half later, the telephone operator told Randolph that the phone in room 1046 was still off the hook and had been the entire time. This time, Randolph took a master key up with him. Roland was lying naked on the bed, and the bellboy assumed he was passed out drunk. Not trying to invade his personal space or be in there any longer than needed, he simply put the phone back on the receiver and locked the door after he left. But an hour later, at around 10:30 a.m., the phone was again off the hook. When Randolph went a third time to investigate, what he walked into shocked him to his very core. Just within 2 feet of the door, the man was curled over his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands, and the room was now splattered with blood all over the walls, the bed, and the bathroom. He immediately left the room, and his manager hurried to the room in his wake, but could barely open the door. Now Roland had collapsed on the other side. Police arrived to investigate and saw that the man had been restrained with cord wrapped around his neck, his wrists, and his ankles. It was a clear sign of torture, as he had multiple knife wounds bleeding in his chest just over his heart. The man's skull had been fractured on the right side, and he was struck forcibly more than once. Bruising braided his neck, suggesting strangulation was used as one of the many methods of torture. But Roland was still semi-conscious, so Detective Ira Johnson asked who had been in the room with him. Roland replied, "Nobody." After being asked how this happened, he said, "I fell against the bathtub." They asked if he attempted to commit suicide, to which he mumbled no, before falling unconscious. After he was rushed to the hospital, investigators noticed the blood on his body was dry, indicating the stabbing and cutting would have taken place well before the bellboy went to room 1046 at 7 in the morning. And when they searched the room, no clothes were found anywhere. The black coat he'd arrived in was gone. There was no shirt, no pants, and no socks or shoes. The closest thing to clothing was the label from a necktie. Also missing from the room were the toiletries, soap, shampoo, and towels. And anything that could have been the weapon was also nowhere to be found. This, along with Roland being bound by cord, set aside the possibility of suicide. The only things in the room were 2 empty water glasses, an unlit cigarette, a hairpin, a safety pin, and a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. One of the glasses had a broken piece missing, and the other had 4 small fingerprints, possibly from a woman. The hotel guests were all questioned, but nothing was resolved. Since Roland had listed his hometown as Los Angeles, the detectives reached out to the LA police, but there were no records of a Roland T. Owen. And after finding nothing about him, they were beginning to think that a Roland T. Owen did not exist. Tragically, they weren't able to speak to him because he had died from his injuries just after midnight on the 5th of January. A possible sighting of Roland on the night of January 3rd was investigated, but eventually ruled out. One lead seemed promising. After speaking to the staff about Roland complaining about the neighboring hotel's prices, detectives checked the register in the Mulebach Hotel and didn't find a Roland T. Owen, but the front desk did recognize the man as staying in the hotel the night before he went to the president. His home address was also listed as Los Angeles, but the name he used was Eugene K. Scott. Yet after searching for this man, they realized this was just another false name. And after another name, Cecil Werner, arose through the search, the police were beginning to wonder if they would ever identify the John Doe. An announcement was made in the papers that the man who claimed to be Roland T. Owen would be buried. Later, the funeral home received an envelope containing cash from an anonymous sender. The cash was just enough to pay for the funeral expenses and the burial. Along with this was a floral tribute to Roland and a card that read, "Love forever, Louise." Even after this mysterious donation, the case went extremely cold. That is, until 2 years later, when the Kansas City police received a letter from a woman named Ruby Ogletree. She claimed a friend of hers saw the picture of Roland T. Owen in a newspaper, along with a description of the bizarre murder. When Ruby saw the picture, her heart sank. She positively identified the scars and other features and claimed he was her 17-year-old son, and his real name was Artemis Ogletree. The detectives expected this lead to flourish new evidence, but it ended up leaving them with more questions than they had before. Artemis left home in 1934 to travel America, and initially would pen handwritten letters to his mother. But in 1935, Ruby began receiving letters from a typewriter. After Artemis's murder, 3 letters were sent to her from someone claiming to be him. The sender of the letters also claimed he was leaving the United States and was off to Egypt. In 1936, Ruby tried locating him through the U.S. consul in Cairo, Egypt, but they weren't able to confirm that an Artemis Ogletree had ever traveled there. Detectives were able to find out that Artemis had shared a room with another man in a different hotel in Kansas City sometime before his murder. They wondered if this man was the Don Artemis spoke of and referred to in his note, and if Don was the rough-voiced man who told Mary Soptic through the locker door of room 1046 that they didn't need any towels. The strange murder of now Artemis Ogletree leaves endless room for theories and speculation. A major thread in the case is the involvement of Don. It's believed the mysterious man beat and tortured Artemis to death in room 1046. But how did no one in the hotel see Don or hear such violence taking place? Many also believe Don did not act alone. On the night of the murder, the elevator operator Charles Blocker claimed the commercial woman was attempting to find the man and was looking all night. Could she have been somehow connected to Artemis? This theory is also backed by the 4 small fingerprints found on the broken glass in the room. Additionally, the guest Gene Owen, who stayed in room 1048, claimed to hear the loud voices of both a man and a woman. Although the police were able to identify their John Doe, this case still remains a baffling mystery, and everyone is still asking the same questions. Why was Artemis killed? And by who? What exactly went on in room 1046 that night? Who was Don? And who was the anonymous donor, Louise? Could she have been the woman whose voice was heard? When Artemis's mother, Ruby, watched as her 17-year-old son left and went to travel the country, she wasn't aware he would become entangled in one of the 20th century's most peculiar crimes. A crime that remains unsolved 87 years later. The mystery of Room 1046. This mystery really jogged my brain. Maybe it's because I've spent so much time at hotels all over the country and in Canada. I've had a lot of boring experiences and a lot of creepy and odd experiences staying at temporary accommodations. And I have to say, one of the things that always creeps me out when I stay in a hotel in a new city that I've never heard of or never been to or never looked at the Yelp page for is the fact that hotels are used for so many things, from something as innocent as needing a quick nap to as vicious as murder. Often people check into hotels in order to commit suicide or to have a rendezvous with a sexual partner that maybe society or their wives or husbands would not agree with. My first thought is that this was a crime involving passion, that perhaps Artemis had become connected to a woman, maybe in love with her, and that either she had a jealous husband or she had some kind of a connection to some lascivious individual who killed Artemis for some kind of gain. Because who sent the letters? Why did it appear that Artemis was still alive to his own mother? Or perhaps Ruby was mistaken. Maybe the man who died wasn't Artemis at all. This is 1936-37, so forensics were primitive at best. But what do you think? Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields, produced by Daniel Wilder, with original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you'd like us to cover on the program, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us in a very direct way, go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support us and allow us to keep the spooky rolling and rolling and rolling. And I want to say a big thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show. And they are Bobbletopia, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Christopher Sullivan, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so very much, and we'll see you next Monday.